Hello. Awesome. So welcome everyone to the Kubernetes demo today. Is there anything anyone would like to demo or discuss?
I don't have anything to demo. I'm struggling a little bit with HA proxy. We just have this special configuration for how the proxy v2 stuff works. And our HA proxy configuration was not previously as flexible as required to enable us to configure the necessary ports that Kubernetes are going to use. So I've been battling that a little bit this morning. I hope to have my final merge request in place. I'm just waiting for our automation to kick in and allow me to push the final change out. Hopefully with that, I could have a working canary instance with pages. So inside of staging, GitLab pages is fully deployed. So far, I've only configured HA proxy to be aware of the canary deployment thus far. I've been trying to figure out how to get that working appropriately. I did find that logging was not working, so I got that fixed. So yeah, it's just a matter of trying to figure out how to make things work. And I'm just eagerly awaiting our automation that bumps versions and pushes configurations out to the staging environment.
Awesome. So we're fully running on staging?
Running as in it's available, but it's not taking traffic yet. That's what I'm trying to tease out. So once I get that figured out, I think my next step is to start looking at the performance parameters, because I'm still currently using the Helm chart defaults for resource requests and limits and such, which is not going to be very safe for production. So I hope once I get things into staging, once I get traffic on staging, I'm going to do some rudimentary performance testing to figure out what kind of values we need. That way I could start making those adjustments as well. So it's moving along, just very slowly.
Do you need, well, I guess you don't know yet, but like, do you need any help with HA proxy?
Not at the moment. Jarvis been reviewing my merge request this morning, and he's been helping me out pretty nicely. So it's just a matter of like our automation just runs whenever it feels like. It seems like I thought it ran as soon as you hit the merge button, but no, it waited 20 minutes before it kicked off the next job. I'm like, okay, whatever.
Awesome.
So just
okay,
a waiting game.
Great. Okay, cool. Are there any other questions people have around pages?
I don't have questions now.
One thing I was going to just mention and had a question about. So on Monday or Tuesday, maybe it was agreed that we could do the rate limiting change for pages after we've completed the migration, which is great. We only have to do that once. But what I wanted to just check in on was whether we did we get to a decision with distribution about how we would actually be able to do this? Like, is there any stuff that could be happening in parallel whilst we do the pages migration?
We can be making changes to the Helm chart. I did not follow up to see if that work started to get pulled at all. So I don't know if anyone has started to work on the Helm chart at all.
Okay.
I also don't have the issue handy, so
yeah, I'm just trying to dig it out. Okay, so it looks like it actually got deprioritized, so that's excellent. So I shall get that reprioritized. So that's the issue 2083. So was there somewhere, was it in here that you, I know you had a discussion, was it with Jason Skubbeck in Slack? Did all of that stuff go into this issue?
I don't remember.
Okay, so would you mind just like checking on that? And because I'd quite like to get the charts changes.
So the work that I suspected needs to be completed, I left a comment on October 19th inside of this issue. I don't believe I had a conversation about this issue outside of this issue.
Okay, as long as we have everything in there, that's fine. Great. Okay, so distribution should know, like they're not waiting on us for anything, right? Like it's just literally a case of prioritizing the changes.
That's how I interpret it, yeah.
Cool. Okay, great. Let me follow up there. Great. Are there any other things people want to talk about around pages?
I don't believe so.
Okay, awesome. So the other thing I'd like to just mention is the proposed Q4 Okr that we work with scalability and migrate Redis, or as many instances of Redis as we possibly can. Like curious to kind of get like people's initial thoughts on that. Non-contentious, seem like a reasonable goal.
I think this is going to be interesting. I enjoy the idea. I worry about the type of performance that we're going to get because these are going to be very large pods with a very large memory footprint. And virtual machines are usually better at that than, one massive pod.
I have a question about this. So what happens if Kubernetes decide to move the pods into another node and we lose all of our cache?
So there's ways to work with that. So there's the pod disruption budget. And what we would probably do is not use a deployment object, but use like a stateful set.
Okay.
That would enable Kubernetes to say, hey, if I'm going to interrupt one of these, let's do one at a time.
Because we are using a clustered installation of Redis, right? So it's not it's HA at the moment. So is
not
that correct?
all of them. Some of them are, not all of them.
Okay.
Really?
I remember. I remember once in the past when we had a problem with cache poisoning, was an incident about cache poisoning. And then the solution was to push forward the change to remove, because it was a multi-versions incompatibility problem between Canary and main stage. And so we had options was, we decided to push forward because the change was good. So we wanted to remove the gap and invalidate the cache. And we paid a high price in terms of performance for hours because of this, because every single page was rebuilding the cache. So what scares me about this is when we migrate, what's the plan for avoiding having a moment when we flip a switch and all of a sudden we have no cache because it's going to the new service? And second, what happens when Kubernetes does its magic and does the Kubernetes things and cache may disappear?
I haven't looked into what it's going to be like to migrate from Redis virtual machines to Redis inside of Kubernetes, but we're going to have to solve for a few problems. One is pointing all of our virtual machines and all of Kubernetes to the new Redis cluster, and then also syncing those two together for a period of time until the appropriate primary takes over. Neither of which I know how to accomplish at this moment in time. So that's going to be an interesting problem to solve. The other thing I'm curious about is like maintenance procedures. Like you briefly highlighted this, and we could solve this with stateful sets, but I'm still curious as to what we're going to do with node pools and what kind of nodes we're going to end up running, because Redis is not small for some of our clusters, using 80 gigabytes of RAM and for one or two of them. That's going to be a massive pod that has a lot of data stuck inside of it. So there's also the option of whether or not we do any sort of disk associated with these Redis pods, or if they're just running everything inside of memory. Like we have options. We need to invest some time to investigate what direction we want to go down. I've not done any sort of research into this at all just yet, because my focus has been elsewhere currently. So I welcome this challenge.
Challenge is the right word, right? Like we're definitely going,
Yeah.
it's definitely an ambitious OKR, especially for Q4. I know scalability have already done some thinking around this. Now, one thing we do know is we have different types of Redis instance. Some of them should be able to migrate as is. Some of them will require some work before they're ready, and some of them we definitely shouldn't touch. So there'll be some kind of initial discussion to try and identify which instances fall into each categories. What I'm hoping is we'll find like one that's suitable for like an as-is migration that we can start working on and figuring out a plan for, and alongside scalability can be picking up some work for like what needs to change on one of the other instances to make it suitable for migration. We probably won't get through all the instances in a quarter, but if we got through at least one or more, then I think that would be a super achievement and would really like improve the kind of operability of Redis. But we certainly need to work closely with scalability to like figure out options and address these concerns of like see how we're going to do a migration.
My biggest fear is that we're going to have some situation where we need to specify 2 clusters in our application configurations, and we don't have any support for that. I hope we don't have to go down that route.
Yeah.
I was exactly thinking about this, that probably the safer approach is implementing this at application level with 2 clusters, and one is read only. And both are read operation enabled, only one is write enabled. So you search the new one. If it's empty, you read on the old one, but once you update, you write on the new one.
Yeah.
And this is how you can gradually migrate the cache without going a specific migration task for moving stuff from one place to another one. But yeah, this goes in developers land.
We could also contribute, right? Like we also, both scalability and delivery, we have engineers who can contribute. So, you know, we could certainly factor that in and contribute that back in ourselves if we want to go that way. So much to be decided. I think the kind of this time we haven't had an objective like this before, but this objective will be a kind of a encouragement to us to try and figure some of this stuff out. So I think not often we have a good idea of what the solution is before we set these objectives. But in this case, I think we'll try and figure out what's needed in order to achieve the objective. That probably means the outcome is less certain. But I think even if we can make some progress and like have a good plan, and perhaps we get some of the instances migrated, that would still be a huge win.
I was disappointed to hear that apparently there's no good Redis operator out there. I'm very surprised to hear about that.
Same, yeah, very much the same. What do you reckon? What does that mean? Does that mean that people are using something other than Redis, or people have all like homegrown
That's a good
something?
question.
I think they run VMs or Redis as a service, because you need a lot of load before you actually need to scale out Redis. Because
yeah.
and really, I mean, also we are okay. I'm gonna do a bold statement here. We should not use Redis the way we are. We should have moved to a proper queuing system like RabbitMQ a long time ago. Because so Redis is great when you want to store cache on it. And if you lose it, yeah, we will survive. We may take a hit in terms of performance because we have to recompute caches and things like that. But nothing that should be persisted, nothing that is message passing should be in Redis in a proper size enterprise application. But we are using this because we use Sidekick. And so all of our queuing system is stuck in Redis. And if we lose that, that's a problem. That's a real problem because you're losing jobs. So that's my view on it.
Interesting. Rabbit's an interesting one. Like I've worked in a place previously where we used Rabbit, but we regularly lost messages. And in the end, we switched. I feel like do people use Cassandra for something for this sort of stuff these days?
You can. I mean, no, not Cassandra. Use Kafka. So basically, if you just have to process things that are moving, you start with Redis. Then you may consider going onto a Rabbit or a queuing system. And then if you have a lot of stuff and you actually want to have, I think the key point is that they have independent reads. So you can basically produce stuff and then point readers back point back in time and process the stream from within a different piece. Then you go with Kafka. I've never worked with Kafka, but I did with RabbitMQ. And yeah, out of the box, it doesn't really support Rails. You need to work with sneakers, and it completely changed the way you interact with asynchronous job processing. But it's extremely powerful because basically you can implement the processing mechanism in any other language. So the big switch is that usually you put things in a queue, and there may be multiple programs and multiple applications that are just reading, processing, and putting things into another queue. And the reason you may lose something is because the queuing system is a routing system. So if you misconfigure it, your message will end up into the dead letter mailbox, I think is the name. Basically, there's the concept where things can get lost.
No, like we literally lost things. We concluded in the end that the rabbit was eating stuff. That was like the official conclusion. Luckily, we were working in a place that kind of didn't matter so much, but yeah, it was a bit inconvenient. Awesome. Okay, yeah. So I mean, I think it's gonna be kind of a fun one. I don't think we've had quite such a kind of architectural design challenge for a little while. So I think it'll be fun to work with scalability and kind of figure some of this stuff out. But I think I say there'll be kind of phases of what we haven't got really deeply analyzed is what the different needs of the Redis are. I know there are different types of Redis instance running. And often when we have a request for a new Redis instance, it's just kind of, we don't kind of like cookie cutter them. We just kind of make it specified for what that particular problem needs. There's probably some benefit there to us actually having different categories of a Redis instance, so that in the future, when we add a new one, we go, okay, you're getting like, you know, version A or version B, and it kind of just comes out of the box a bit more. But we have to figure out like, well, yeah, go ahead.
I know we've also got some interesting configuration inconsistencies. Like we've got some Redises that have Redis and Sentinel all in one box, and we've got some where Redis and Sentinel are two different boxes for some reason.
Yeah.
Some historical context, which I don't know why we set stuff up that way, but you know, something like that's not gonna. We'll have to come up with a singular method of, you know, a unified method of deploying stuff like this in Kubernetes.
Yeah, exactly. So it should be a fun challenge. One thing I do want to say about this, like I think that this is a really objective worthy service, because you know lots of people care about this service, super important to us. But that doesn't mean that we don't get to like do other things. So I'm definitely expecting us to continue picking away at Kate's workload tooling, improving that. And even like Camo Proxy, I'm totally fine if we want to migrate that. It looks small enough that if we can just fit it in around other stuff, totally supportive of us pushing ahead with that stuff as well.
I guess that's a good segue into the conversation about our Q4 OKRs. Like, what other questions do we need to answer for finalizing what we want to do for that quarter?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, that's a really great question. I think probably the main thing I have kind of outstanding is whether is this a new kit in Skavek?
No. One of the many that, you know, no one wants to adopt.
Honestly, if I lived close, could I come and collect one if I get into the US? I think I could get home with a kit.
You know, feel free to drop by.
Skavek is our kitten adopter, fosterer, sorry. They're pretty much adopted though, right? So there's always like a steady stream of new kittens, which is, I appreciate at least. So in terms of Q4, I think the outstanding one is how much do we, like, if people agree with like kind of general concept of Redis and figuring out a kind of future approach for K8s workloads and release tools. The other one that's outstanding is what do we want to do with the K8s workloads, like tooling? Now, we could either just keep chipping away at this as we've done through this quarter, or if you'd rather have it as an actual key result, we could put something like, I know, like 2-3 meaningful workload improvements or something like that, if you'd rather have it as a key result.
What if we keep chipping away at things the way we have been? That way we could focus our efforts on trying to figure out what we want to do with Redis, and also just finishing up the pages work.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Like I was saying to Graham yesterday, and like I'm really happy for us to be prioritizing these things around. I think the challenge I see right now of taking our tech debt bucket and mapping it to an objective at the moment is just literally like we haven't really broken that down into like what are the small tasks. Like I think what the epic that Graham just completed of like upgrading Helm was a nice one that like had a clear outcome, and it had sort of like 5 or 6 little pieces inside it. So I think if we can just try and break those bits down, we can just put those alongside, and I don't think they have to be in an objective, as long as people feel happy that believe, I guess, that we'll still be prioritizing them.
I did see that apparently version 122 of Kubernetes is going to be kind of harsh. I saw
Yeah.
an issue related to that. So I think we're going to be a little interrupted as far as overall goals anyways.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to have to make a plan for that one and figure out what we need to do to actually get that upgrade. So end of March is the sort of deadline for that. But yeah, I reckon, like I say, maybe like end of November, we try and like make sure we know what pieces we actually need to get through to handle that. Okay, so how about we don't include the k8s workload tooling improvements in as a key result, but we make sure we actually like have some pieces cut and we continue to prioritize those. Awesome. And what I'm kind of expecting is once we do have the, so start up a blueprint and we can actually work out like, what does the future of k8s workloads look like? And how does it tie into release tools? Like, you know, is there a point where we can just ditch deployer and like k8s workload steps in and just calls deployer if it really needs to, you know, and can change all that. And then off the back of that, we can make a kind of roadmap of like, here is what we actually need to do to k8s workloads to like make it the, I mean, it's going to be our kind of like main deployment piece for the future, right? So we can figure out that.
On that point,
I think if,
oh, sorry, go ahead.
If anything, I think answering that precise question would probably make a good goal, maybe not an OKR, but a good goal for Q4, because then we could start working towards it in the next quarter.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. I don't think it's going to be a trivial question to answer. So yeah.
No.
So I was going to mention that Pages is the last VM in our fleet section of the deployment. And we were discussing this with Graham this morning, that once the migration is completed, we can tear apart the k8s workload from the deployer and bring this straight into release tools, which is something that will unblock a lot of work in single pipeline, in reordering of deployments, as well as the removal of post-deployment migration. So there are many things that need to happen for this, but one of the biggest problem was the split of the deployment pipeline, because it was supposed to be do up until the fleet as a trigger, then do the fleet as a trigger, and then do what's after the fleet as another trigger. But if there's nothing in the fleet, it's just k8s workload, then it's easier, because we just do everything up until we are ready to run the fleet. Then we run the fleet with k8s workload. And then we can think about if we want to have more control over, let's say, zonal cluster or things like that into release tools instead of having it in k8s workload, but that's not a topic. And then once we are back from that thing, we can decide if we want to move to the next environment or run post-deployment migration or trigger QA, whatever. So depending on what will be the shape of the feature deployment pipeline. But yeah, I think it's an important goal. So when Pages will be moved, a lot of things will be unblocked.
I'm curious as to what kind of things you're looking forward to, because even though we remove Pages, we still have the coordination required for pre and post migrations, the assets, as well as Gitly and Prefect.
Yeah. So my end goal is something like this. So I would like to extract, I'm going to be a bit in details here. I would like to extract the environment locking feature, which is just a Python or a shell script, I don't remember, out of the deployer into release tools, so that I'm going to lock environment at release tools level. Okay, so I do put the lock on the environment, then I will trigger the deployer with basically the new way we trigger the deployer is just prepare me this environment, which means regular migration, Gitly, prefect, stop, asset. Yeah, so everything up until the fleet point. And then the pipeline is done. It's completed. So controls goes back to release tools, which can do the Kubernetes, we can do Kubernetes. At that point, depending on how we are on those other epics that I mentioned, we may decide to trigger QA from release tools or post-deployment migration, or I mean, it depends, because we are moving several parts at the same time. But the point is that we can basically trigger back to release tools and say, complete the deployment, but everything after the fleet is kind of bookkeeping stuff, because is sending notification that we already moved. So probably there's nothing there. Is release tracking, but when we track, we are triggering back to release tools. So we can just run the tracking in release tools. There is the environment unlocking. As I said, I would like to move that script up to the release tools level. So it's kind of bookkeeping stuff. So probably there's nothing left to be done, because there's just QA and post-deployment migration. There are two things that we want to move around.
There's a lot of stuff that we could probably pull out of the coordinated pipeline, or excuse me, we could pull out of deployer
Into the,
push it into like a rake task of the coordinated pipeline, for example.
Yeah, that's the goal.
I'm curious as to what that's going to look like, because I think when I'm initially like imagining is that our coordinated pipeline becomes a lot larger in scope, larger in size. And I'm just kind of curious as to like how big it's going to become.
Yeah, I mean, there are things that got triggered that are already there to just expand on side. And basically those things that expand on side are going to be shorter, and the main thing going to be larger. We can even consider triggering children pipeline in the same project. I mean, it's an option. If the visualization around this is not that good, probably we can reorganize things around. But yeah, I mean, we have many things in flight on this for 1 year now, I think. So once we get out of this, then we can also consider refactoring how the pipeline looks.
So all I hear is Alessio wanting me to get pages migrated quickly.
Pretty much. That was the main takeaway. Get it done right away, Scarborough.
No, I was going to say that I'm happy that we are close to it. So for me, it was kind of a prize.
Brilliant. One thing also, Scarborough, so Henry and I chatted yesterday, and kind of general overview in the team. So registry is on track for heading to production, hopefully tomorrow. So we should be kind of through the bulk of the work pretty soon for that. The Nginx removal for API is planned in for afterwards, which Henry will pick back up. Graham has started work on the auto deploy rescheduling, which I expect will take him some weeks at least. But what we can do some point next week is, if you want to, like, depending on how you're going pages, like once Henry's through the API work, removing Nginx from API, I should say, if we want to redistribute any of your tasks, give you more release management time, we can do that.
I think when it comes to pages, what I'll do is pretty much similar to what I've done in the past, where once we get to the point where we're like close to running things into production, so long as not everyone else is terribly busy, I'll probably start doing handoffs. Be like, hey, we're here. If you could help me get this across, rock it out. You know, just to try to nudge it along a little faster. But I'm not going to do that until, I'm not going to consider that until production at least. So
makes sense. Cool.
It will be a little bit before I consider that in the first place.
Awesome. All right, makes sense. Cool. Welcome, Henry. Sounds like you've had a fun afternoon.
No, it wasn't too bad. But you know, if you enable monitoring, and suddenly you get more alerts for something that you wasn't aware of. So, but it wasn't really affecting anything. Just paging the EOC, so it's fine now.
Awesome, great stuff. Was there anything you wanted to go through today, Henry?
No, I didn't have any discussion topics, but I'm happy to jump on the pages migration after I finish the other projects. So
awesome, great stuff. And then we've talked so much about very random things, but this may be an unfair question, but just in case, Ahmad, have you got any questions you want us, like, feel free to ask, like there's no stupid questions here. If there's anything that would, you'd like to cover.
It's good from my side. I'm just like listening and trying to understand. So all is good.
So the words will start to mean things to you before too long. Don't worry, the context will be coming. Awesome. All right. If there is nothing else, then thank you very much, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day. I'll follow up with the prioritization of the charts changes for the rate limiting on pages and see if we can get that moving. But good luck with HA proxy. Scale back. Give us a shout if you get stuck there. All righty. All right. Take care, everyone. Have a good rest of your day.